We know a lot about Fallout 4, but honestly, there's still loads that people get wrong. So today I'm breaking down everything people get wrong about Fallout 4, starting with one most people don't even notice. It's a shooter game. Yeah, we start heavy with one of the most criticized and, to my opinion, wrong statements about the game. I can understand that the people see this game as something more similar to a shooter than an RPG. Things like the high enemy density and infested areas with little variation. But here's the misunderstanding. While it's real that Fallout 4 has more than one site with a lot of enemies, repetitive combat, and an emphasis on more looting than exploring and using the RPG system, the game has a lot more to offer and a bit more below the surface. One of the most criticized parts are the simplified quests to a yes or no in general terms, with the character development having a great reduction of quality, and many missions becoming the go from X to Y, kill everything and come back. Things like the Radiant quests reinforces the idea of being more shooter than RPG, but we still have the options to complete quests in different fashion than only shooting at everything that moves. The player's choices are a bit superficial, but still are decisions. And hey, you all are forgetting great things. I know the game is far from perfect, but what game is? We have a vast collection of good quests, dialogues, missions, backgrounds, and one of the things that Fallout exceeds off, contextual story. Visiting locations that have nothing of value, loot or enemies, but still shares something, a story. Some mannequins and diabolical poises, objects that don't belong where they are, sacred items or secret entrances. All of that adds value and impacts the opinion of being a shooting gallery. Remember Nick's holotapes? Or The Last Voyage of the USS Constitution. Stories filled to the brim with humor or emotions, a gripping story or something to tell us besides shooting something, even multiple ways of resolving the conflict. Quests where you get to represent a character, yeah, roleplay inside a game of role-playing, being a superhero on the Commonwealth and staying in character through all the drama. Nice, right? So don't follow all the general consensus. While it's real that the game is far more action-packed than the others in the saga, with a lot more enemies and emphasis on the violent approach. Now, having tackled a bit of the game opinion, let's talk about some of the insanely wrong facts about the story. Railroad Tunnel Vision, a really pivotal faction depending on your decisions. This faction travels from Fallout 3 to 4, and you can get a bit of a blurry vision if you're not on the details when you work with them. The first misconception that people tend to get from them starts in F3, that they don't care for the people in general, and more specifically, for the enslaved ones. I understand that this comes from the fact of having highly specific objectives and limited resources. Even on gameplay, you rarely will see them helping humans or involved in other general issues on the wasteland, but calm down, they have their reasons. So, starting on the reasons, one of them, and very logical if you think about it, is the fact that having so limited resources can leave you with a diminished capability of achieving your goals. This is clearly stated on the limited resources that they have, being a small and even secretive organization that also struggles a lot if you don't tend to give them a hand here and there. Well, that answers a lot. In a lot of moments, you can see that they struggle and also are constantly running away from the Institute, which shows in the form of lacking the manpower or even the resources to hold their ground in more than a handful of situations. That leaves us with our other point, the secrecy and the security that they constantly try to maintain, and to lack serious power to tackle other different problems in the Commonwealth, like the human slavery that we spoke about in the beginning. They basically can't, and is every sign on the game of it. You can see while exploring a bit, maintain an eye out for things like their bases and the almost borderline impossible efforts that they do for maintaining absolute secrecy. Being more humanitarian directly means helping the Commonwealth, and at the same time compromises them and their secrecy. As you can see constantly through the game, the Institute is just trying to locate them, as they are a fairly easy target to wipe out of existence at the moment of being discovered. Yeah, they have stealth and darkness through the subterfuge that they use, but still are weak at core. The final and most important point, and let me add that you can see it clearly in Fallout 4, is the core purpose of the Railroad, to liberate those who they consider deserving of freedom, for various reasons, like being self-aware. Yeah, I am talking about the synths, our buddies, from the Institute. Their motto, if you can say it in some way by one of the agents in Fallout 4, is, other groups might help humans, but only the Railroad helps synths. And that resumes everything in a few words. The Railroad is noble on his goals, but don't help the fact that is their only goal. That detail alone makes, in general opinions on any forum that you can visit, the worst, or at least one of the worst factions. But remember, this is still a general opinion or consensus. Their goals align with their way of thinking, so nothing bad with it. A cool fact that we don't see in most games is that the Brotherhood of Steel and the Railroad deteriorates the relationship through the game progressing, and after the bomb explodes on the Mission Mass Fusion, they will become enemies. If you were careful and studied the details, put an eye out for learning about both factions, this is something that you can see coming from a mile behind, but still is cool to see that it happens inside the game, showing a flawed philosophy. This is the treasure that you can get from exploring both sides, and being witness to the delivering of the only outcome that can happen, in my opinion. Yeah, neither of them has really long-term plans. On this corner is genocide against all the artificial humans, and for the Railroad, Railroad, yeah, especially them above all, never exactly say what they will do for the synths once they are freed. We only see some glimpses on their ending, but it's not enough. Continuing with the flow, we have another important part that starts right from the Railroad but is on the other side, yeah, the synths. Synths after Railroad. To be honest, I am heavily conflicted with this one. Some time ago, I spended a fair share of my time exploring the vastities of internet and discussing a variety of topics on forums and threads. Some of these were about the synths and the Railroad, and oh boy, we have material to talk about. Remember that the Railroad have this curse, in a way of speaking, about not caring for humans, so they already have this type of negative opinion orbiting them around, so talking about it more in detail is already a bit one-sided in contrast with the faction. What I mean by that is that, yeah, they capture slavers and help free the synths, but what about it? Or what happens next? It's not like they have a powerful nation or sanctuary to locate them, so we already have a bit of mystery. And oh boy, the method doesn't help either, but stick to the details. Remember, one of the first things that we can learn about it is that they mind wipe the synths and call it a day. So how is that better than the original captors, the Institute? We have to investigate a bit, and we learn that while they actually mind wipe them is not forced, and they are given a choice. That alone is much more better trait than the Institute for starters, but we also have the dialogue that Patriot gives us on an important quest, that he reprograms synths to want freedom. That doesn't show much of a choice. Working a bit more ahead, you learn that, yeah, the mind wipe still happens, but what he reprograms the work schedules, this shows on a mission, so is easy to miss these type of details. And that shows us that they really give them a chance of escaping, not another faction trying to get ahead using synths and technology. Yeah, they put us on a hard spot to trust them, and I understand why the general consensus doesn't like them, is for things like that, but stick with me, they aren't damaging them, they are just spreading a bit of misinformation. Following the story to the end and helping the Railroad gives us a better insight and actually clarifies details like that one. For example, you can see that any personal synth or not, even the Institute personal, that want to get out, are completely free to be let through. And that's it. You can see that the goal is genuinely noble and at the same time really hard to achieve, as they are the only ones that care for the synths. Now, taking the general consensus in mind, let's work on the really negative hate that Fallout 4 received. Besides the bugs, we are talking about the structure. Illusion of choice. One of the biggest flops that Fallout 4 had was the fact of New Vegas existing. I know this can sound like nostalgia talking, but we are talking about facts. The comparison was inevitable and hit hard. Starting with the surface, Fallout 4 isn't a bad game or even a bad RPG. You really have the freedom and the illusion of making your own path, but stick with me, it really does. Besides what the actual story offers us, we already start with an extremely limiting way of interacting with the world. The 4 dialogue options, yeah, we have at least a voice for our character. But if the price for the voicing is having a massive decrease of options for dialogue, please stay silent the rest of the saga. This is extremely tied to the people thinking that as any other Fallout, you shape your own story. And that cannot be more far from the reality. I know it sounds like a rant, but is a fact. If I had to put numbers, so the times that one of the dialogue options changed something more than a response, I would be so bold to say that at least 80% of the game is that way. That hits very deep. If you came from any other Fallout, most of the time any dialogue has 2 outcomes and are very easy to identify. A or B, and the 4 dialogues only change a bit. The responses, but the end is a simple choice. If no skill check is involved, or happens the same thing. Remember the predecessors and the most compared to 4 New Vegas. If you had the skills to surpass any conversation, you still had submenus to change the outcome a bit, or you can directly skip skill checks if your choices of dialogue were clever enough, effectively changing the outcome. What I am trying to explain here is that the story handling was very bad. I understand that voicing everything would be a massive work, but you could have taken the Yakuza approach and only voiced the main quests, leaving everything to pure text, because the voicing only came to downgrade the experience of anyone that played a Fallout before. With that explained and on the table, everything in the game is tied to your opinions and choices, or at the very least is what most of the players think. When you get around a bit, you can get the full picture. The story mostly feels a bit hollow because you can choose A, B, or C, but not shape a bit everyone to make a more personalized decision, something you could do to a certain extent in some of the past games. To further understand this, we need to talk about the other half of the game, the factions, and why they are so important in this case. Good and bad faction? With all the context, this will be way easier to understand. First of all, to clarify what the people think and what is the real deal, we have to compare it to something, right? Let's do it with New Vegas. We have the main quest line of both games a bit contrasted. What do I mean by that, you ask? Well, this is easily explained in a few words. In New Vegas, all the factions have the same goal and want basically the same, as can be seen for some. This means a bit of restriction, because if you don't help someone, then you are an enemy, right? Well, no, and that is what makes a magical experience to play New Vegas the first time. Imagine walking to a site, and in the middle of it, you are dropped on an airplane crashing down. You have to do something, or even choose not to, but you're in anyway. It is better to seize the moment, try to make it land, finish blowing it yourself, or repair it mid-air. Options, and even better, your own personality can be plasmed through the game as you have the options to do something or make it worse, but who decides that? Now on the other side, we are jumping around to Fallout 4. With it, every faction basically has their goals, their bias and preconceived intentional or unintentional moral and vision or expectation of what will happen when they accomplish. You have far more options on paper, but you really have them? Different factions and outcomes, you are in, against them, or on your own side, but at the end of the day, the line is drawn and you have to follow it. You can choose a car, an airplane, a tank, whatever, but the line is here the way I see it. And I think you understand more easily. You have 4 trains to 4 locations, but you can only choose one, not decide much more than that. Of course the quality is there. You're in for a ride, but this doesn't pay as much because you're still only participating, not deciding more than the faction. Fallout has this system of with them or against them, a bit bad for an RPG. Our real impact. Let's work from the first thing that you learn of the game when the story starts giving you glimpses of what it will be. The factions have goals as always, and this time are explored a bit further, or at least that is what the people are led to believe. We have 2 main concepts besides the factions and their own goals, the Commonwealth and the violence and the all-going war that it is and always has been, but this time we have another part, the synths. The game tells us basically that if we don't put our own hands on the matter, the synths are the future of the Commonwealth, for the better or the worst. Okay, that shows great promise, but how is it through the game? Well, prepare yourself. The game doesn't push this concept much further than a choice. Yeah, everything leads to one choice, and since people don't tend to finish this type of games, it is completely normal to have the misconception of shaping your ending with decisions, kinda, but isn't that deep. We aren't talking about all the goals and outcomes of every faction. That is not the point, but see it that way. Fallout 4 is heavily based on your opinion as a person, not a character, not role-playing, or even not helping you question your morals and beliefs, and this, as a result, gives us a linear game, a bit bad for this type of genre. When a game shows you his cards and you choose a side depending on your opinions, but never really making you stop to think a bit or give you some plot twists or a shock because something you thought wasn't the real deal, well, you start and finish with the same belief. To end this point, dumbing down the choices wasn't the path, and Fallout 4 paid a bit of price for it. They sold it as a vast RPG with freedom and offered it, but in a much smaller dose than its predecessors. Now, having talked about the overall structure of the game, we need to talk about one concept that people tend to underrate a bit, the missions. How the story really works. Check this flowchart is how the game works when you advance the story. As you can see, this can kind of contrast my previous point of being linear, isn't it? Well, not exactly. As you can see, it's very easy to distinguish each different path and outcome. If you choose one side, then you're in and against other factions. So I think that tiddies up a bit all the previous explanation. But why do I show you this? Well, to show you that what Bethesda sold us, a complicated and multi-dimensional group of factions that would be pinned or allied depending on us, is reduced to this. Choose a side and then follow it to the end, completely separated from the other factions, and even making them hostile after certain points of the game. And to be fair, most people have this misconception of a very bland and linear game, and others have the totally opposite feeling. In reality, we got a bit of middle ground with some of the best and worst aspects of every side. Bethesda started with every good intention of allowing us to mark our own path and roleplay as we wanted to, just like New Vegas. However, the storytelling failed and the writers scrambled what they could to make them different and not only villainous and heroic groups. Well, for starters, they show us the Minutemen, the good guys in every range of the word. Sadly, their missions were pretty basic, gameplay and story-wise, but still they were the base for everything. They were the default faction, and overall the people that you would help for the good for everyone. Ending. Then the other factions had some very particular goals and ways of interacting with the world. For starters, the Brotherhood are still some hate everything but humans people. The Railroad only helps synths than the Institute? Well, why the fuck would you choose the Institute? Sean was supposed to be another piece, not the central. You can see this on the different missions about it and the fact that this part of the plot was forgotten so quickly. This affected the quest structure because everything had to round around your personal mission. At the end, they used Sean as the method to get the sole survivor in the Institute. The Railroad and the Brotherhood are also scripted during the main quest, so you see a lot of things going on during the story, but a glimpse to the chart, and you can easily see that you cannot avoid the structure, and you need to progress through their design, breaking the multiple layers of design that we were supposed to get. Every faction has its pivotal point of being hostile or not. You don't have workarounds or any quest, dialogue, skill check, or whatever to change the outcome. This, in my opinion, is what obliterates the game when you compare it with New Vegas. Now, with everything said about the quests, we have to talk about one of the most misunderstood mechanics of the game. You want to know which one? The settlements. First of all, I understand that this is a chore in some cases. A settlement needs help is drilled in our minds, but continues continue here with me. In a general consensus, it is a feature not worth the hassle, and it's a beta test for the CAMP of Fallout 76, and I think they are right, but that doesn't mean that this doesn't have any value. It's a powerful tool. Imagine that you have an idea of having a settlement of pure vault dwellers or growing your own society because you want to have an empire or something like that. This is something very avoidable. I did this on maybe my first 2 or 3 playthroughs, but learned to love it and found a lot of hidden details that were worth it. For example, one of the most cool that I found on one of my recent gameplays is that some synths can actually infiltrate your settlements, and when the Institute attacks you, if that happens, they will join the fight against you. Besides that, they don't do anything else, for good or not. For example, you can recreate some of the forgotten factions or create your own with a settlement. Has any impact on the story? Absolutely not, but helps a bit to make our own path. It's an underrated system because it provides some things that the game doesn't show in more appropriate ways, but it's still here in a couple of words, giving depth and a lot of importance to our sole survivor. The freedom that we all want and crave for, it's here. It's not exactly what we wanted, well, of course, but here it is, and we need to play our role to exploit this mechanic to the vast maximum. Invest on this as another line of the roleplay that we all love about this saga. For more specialized players out there, maybe a settlement only means a stop to sleep and eat something, special mention on survival difficulty, but gameplay-wise, they help a bit with the resources that they can generate. You can stick to what is convenient, or being completely nuts and make settlements fully maxed and recreate the strip of New Vegas. You can, or at the very least, something similar. The most hated point could be that the roleplay is just for fun, as nothing gets beside having people around. You can't do anything to affect the story, but you can create a new story, so don't sleep on it. And also don't go blindly and hate the building system. After explaining one of the most misunderstood mechanics, we will explore a heavily hated one that has some frustration behind it. Care to learn more? The legendary weapons, generally considered, and I am on that team too, unrewarding and also not logical. Well, yeah, it's random. But still, why would I get a magical effect on a pistol that I found on the trash, and the top tier equipment that the General Lord muscles the killer is dropping me 2 pieces of wood? Legendary loot is one of the most researched systems in forums, discussions, and fights all over the internet. People in general struggle to understand how it works, why they get a powerful effect on a weapon that makes it useless. On another view, I understand that it sometimes breaks the immersion as you find a great weapon after a cruel fight. Then you roam around and kill a mole rat that drops a far better weapon, like why a mole rat drops that. I sometimes find it more funny than stressful. Okay, let's talk facts. The principal sin of this system is the randomized nature, and that's it. We cannot fight with randomness. With that said, we can take some time and explain a bit more in depth why the people don't get it or hate it. Because of that, we aren't talking about mechanics or tricks to exploit it. We are talking about why the people struggle with it. The system lacks any sort of guaranteed perks. Yeah, even the legendary enemies aren't consistent with what they drop. You can sort it out with methods like targeted farming, but we are getting out of our way to use different tactics that the devs didn't put there. The players sort of discovered them. A system with good ideas and being poorly executed, as the legendary mods were the replacement of the unique weapons. We still have unique weapons, but far less, and in my opinion aren't that broken or interesting as past games. For some, this is good, for others like me, an error. In general, that decision is creating the effect of making them feel less special. That's it. We aren't playing with realism or some forces that the player can manipulate to completely break and make the game unplayable. So I still, to this day, don't understand this change. Us, the players, are dependent on luck. While a time back, you had to explore, and eventually you will find in some dangerous location a great weapon hidden inside a rock. The fact of randomness adds to the frustration when powerful effects are found on undesirable items. Still, strategy can overpass it, and hell if you want to. Some of the legendary weapons that they sell are awesome, still expect to cash a bit of your fortune, but nothing that you can't handle. With that, we explored 9 diverse facts that the people commonly get wrong or don't understand correctly. If you want to see the 7 levels of Fallout serial killers, click on the video on the screen now.